and this is like a crazy idea, right? Move a technology consulting company from middle financial district into Bayview. In San Francisco, this is a neighborhood that you don't go to. This is a neighborhood that you avoid. It's a place where 25 or 30% of children in the Bayview live below the federal poverty line, which is ridiculous. We've particularly experienced incredible welcome. It's a place where we've seen God at work in a variety of different ways.
I think a lot of times we call something impractical when it's largely left untried.
Bold visionaries, faithful disruptors. Some call them crazy, but they are called to create. Under His power, for His glory. The Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Faith-Driven Entrepreneur Podcast. One of the things that we are thanking God for and celebrating here as a team is this conversation that's coming together more and more from faith-driven entrepreneurs and pastors wondering what it might look like to do more together than we might otherwise do apart. And so when we think about these conversations, it is a beautiful mosaic of people from all around the world in different ways, whether that's just affirming and encouraging or starting a conversation, starting a group, starting ministries, starting businesses. There are so many ways that God's infinite imagination and creativity is playing itself out in this conversation. And so today is a fun part to carry on that conversation in a unique way and a story that some of you guys might be very familiar with. But to get us started, when I was thinking about having this conversation, there are certain friends that care deeply about this intersection and have been a part of this ministry and faith and work conversation for so many years. And so thrilled to have Kevin Kim joining as co-host of this episode. Kevin, so great to have you with us here today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I've been a huge fan of Faith Driven and your work, Henry's work. I was thinking about it this morning. I've known Henry for 15 years. I met him 15 years ago when he was just starting Sovereign's Wealth, right? And this is before Faith Driven, everything that you guys do, Faith Driven entrepreneur, students, philanthropy, you know. It's crazy to see how God can take this idea and this vision and this heartbeat and then turn it into this amazing reality.
What's exciting you most when you think about some of this conversation that's happening with pastors and churches? What's the thing that gives you hope in this season, in this moment of what God's starting to do?
Yeah. So when I was at Menlo Church, I think 13 years ago, I started at Menlo in '07. My last 2 years at Menlo, I was a part of this just transformative project called Catalyst. Basically, it was spearheaded by a friend of mine named Gary Hamill. He's a thought leader in innovation. And the premise was, could we bring the type of creativity, uh, innovation, outside the box thinking that takes place over at these places like Google and Stanford and bring them into the church where a lot of times our thinking and our paradigms are kind of boxed in and it has this low ceiling. And so since then, as we've been seeing more of the collaboration and intersection of ministry and entrepreneurship, I've seen a lot more beautiful, redemptive creativity, and that's super exciting for me.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things that I look forward to is that you can give us a chance to introduce us to some of your friends that are doing some incredible work in this conversation. But one of the fun things for us also as a team is we're stepping into this realm of video podcasting. We do so much in terms of video stories, video conferences. It's crazy to think, actually, we haven't done this earlier. But one of the things that it affords us to do is to bring in some of the great works that already exist and to spotlight some of these stories to kind of accelerate the conversation and get us there quicker and get us into the conversation deeper. So what I would love to do is I would love to start us off by sharing this 8-minute story of Dayspring, this incredible work done by Faith & Co. Ministries there in partnership with Seattle Pacific. And it's going to really give us a good intro to the story. So let's watch this. We'll come back and Kevin will introduce us to some friends to have a conversation here today.
Dayspring is what would happen if you turned a monastery into a tech business.
Could we be Christians all the time in our workplace?
It was something very compelling to me. I actually literally said, oh, I would take out the trash for Dayspring.
We like to be a little crazy about the gospel, living out the gospel.
Embodying and bearing witness to God's redeeming of the workplace, marketplace, and community. And it's kind of crazy, but as a technology company.
Chi-Ming was walking down the corner. I was like, who is this guy with a clipboard? I saw him walk past my shop. Actually walking this corridor where people are mainly afraid to walk, like, oh my God.
The company gave me a gift of sabbatical, and one of the things that I thought to do was to spend 2 days a week just walking the streets. And it was off of that idea of, in order to love a place, you need to know it. In order to know it, you need to learn it. So you got to spend time. So I popped my head in wherever there appeared to be welcome, seeing if there were people of peace, I think, really.
Dayspring's in San Francisco, California, particularly in the Bayview neighborhood, which is a place that we love very much, but other people may have ideas that it's the kind of place you might avoid. Dayspring choosing to be in the Bayview neighborhood comes out of the relationship between Dayspring, the company, and Redeemer, the church.
We were asking the question, what does it look like for Dayspring to practice being a good neighbor? Downtown really isn't a neighborhood in that sense. It doesn't have that kind of network of relationships that is required for a neighborhood.
Dayspring was finishing up their lease, and Redeemer was also finishing up our stint sharing space at another church. And we were asking, where do we go next? And Chi-Ming came to me and said, what do you think about us sharing space together?
And I was actually pretty surprised that the response unanimously was, that sounds like a great idea. At which point I felt like, that sounds like a terrible idea. We're gonna move a professional consulting services organization from smack in the middle of downtown financial district, and we're gonna move it to the hood.
It was hard for, I think, people that I grew up with and also like my family to hear that I was moving here. I had actually grown up being told, don't go to the Bayview, it's dangerous.
It's the place that gets left off of tourist maps. Literally, if you look at a tourist map of San Francisco, it just wouldn't be on there.
It has higher unemployment, about double the rest of the city. It has higher levels of poverty.
Part of the history of Bayview, as well as other places like Bayview, is the kind of business that comes to a neighborhood and says, okay, we're gonna save what a fill in the blank, we're gonna fix ... But for us, we want to come as people and people who are interested in other folks in the neighborhood, things that have already been going on.
What we recognize is that God has been here at work for a long, long time. So we really see ourselves as participating in the work of God.
Hey, sorry I'm late. So the first loan is Simon's. You paid off your first loan.
So Neighbor Fund, for example, it came out of wanting to enable Chi-Ming to have a sabbatical. And during his sabbatical, he just walked the streets of Bayview and met with people. And out of those conversations, heard that one of the significant challenges small business owners in our area face is that kind of initial capital. For a business that already has an idea, maybe has an existing small client base, but doesn't necessarily have the kind of credit history or even the size of loan that they're looking for that a bank would be interested in.
The idea of Neighbor Fund was to be good neighbors by participating in the economy of the place, seeing money as part of how we could join the life of the community.
We don't look for credit scores. We want them to have a meal with us. We get to hear their story. We get to share our own stories.
I needed to make a change, and that change for me was to acquire an oven so I can bake out of my store. And I needed an SUV so I can make deliveries versus renting a U-Haul. And I'm proud to sit here before you and say I've paid off one loan of $5,000, and I just became a recipient of a second loan of $2,500. I don't know if everyone knows about Dayspring and what they're doing over here. But I don't know if they're about tooting their own horn. They're about helping people.
I might add, just adding that instead of reducing
Dayspring Technologies is a core consulting services firm. We build complex applications to solve difficult technical problems. We do consulting work for Golden State Warriors, for UCSF, life science research companies. Second business unit is our Good Budget product, and this basically is a household budgeting platform and helps, in particular, couples to budget together. Roughly 4.5 million downloads to date. And then finally, our Salesforce consulting unit, which focuses on serving nonprofits with customization and configuration of the Salesforce consulting platform.
Dayspring was established with a set of core values where they said, okay, even if these values, holding these values penalize us in the market, we're still going to hold to them. Justice, generosity, integrity, mercy, dependence on God, partnership in the gospel. Those core values were set out up front. Even if these lose us money, even if these cause us to go under, we're going to hold to these.
Part of being a business is that we are interconnected with everyone and every organization around us, that we're not just here to gather as much as possible for ourselves, for our own profit, but to build relationships. That at the core, we are people and other folks are people too.
What we're doing is investing in an ecosystem in the Bayview. That ecosystem includes Dayspring, a business that's committed to the good of the Bayview, because we do think that there's a way in which a business in the marketplace ought to live out a calling to be Christian.
Wow, what an amazing and inspiring story. You know, I first met Chi-Ming through his brother Chiwa. I'm friends with Chiwa, and as many of you guys know, because he's a friend of the faith-driven movement, he was at Kleiner and was responsible for, leading the funding on companies that you may have heard of, like Meta and Spotify. And then he left KP and he started Goodwater Capital with his friend Eric, and they're just crushing it. And when Francis and I were doing these initiatives in the Bayview community, Chiwa was like, "Hey, you gotta meet my brother, my older brother Chi-Ming." It's like, what? I've known you for this long, and I had no idea you had this older brother. And so he said, yeah, he started a tech company in the Bayview, and I'll let them talk about the Bayview community. But basically, this is where all the government housing projects are at in San Francisco, and it's got a it's got a violent crime rate that is 6 times higher than any other place in the city. And he planted and started his tech company in the Bayview. So I was like, wow, I got to hear his story. I got to meet this guy. So I met up with Chi-Ming, and I'm telling you, he is one of the most thoughtful, thought-provoking people I've ever met. I cannot have a normal conversation with. I mean, it's like we can talk about weather or whatever with other people, but every time I sit down with Chi-Ming, I'm like, "Yo, you need to stop. I need to record this. I need to take notes." It's like 2 hours long on theology and moral philosophy, and I mean, I still remember stuff that he said to me 10 years ago. That's how impactful conversations with Chi-Ming are. And then I think it was a few years later, he said, "Hey, can you meet up with my wife Juliette, because she has this vision for education in the Bayview." And then I met Juliette, and wow, she is. I said to myself, this woman could be the CEO of any company. She is brilliant and determined and and principled, and she has this incredible heart for reimagining education for a community like the Bayview. So when you
That's
first came
awesome.
to me and said, hey, can you think of any stories that would be inspiring that we could tell on the Faith Driven podcast for this audience? They were literally the first people I thought of.
Amen. Amen. Well, guys, it's such a gift to see your story. It's, you know, whether you know it or not, we've probably shared that story with probably 25,000 entrepreneurs that have been going through different groups and foundation groups to really understand it. There's so much that strikes us about it. And maybe I would ask you to start here is like, Kevin was doing a little bit of that already, but give us some more context about where you're planted. What is Bayview? What is both the challenge, the opportunity, the brokenness of it? Because people that are tuning in from around the world might not know the specificity of what's going on there. So where is Bayview? Give us some context of where that story that we just watched takes place.
Yeah, so Bayview Hunters Point is in the southeast corner of San Francisco, and it's a corner that, if you look actually on tourist maps that you kind of find in hotels in the Bay Area of San Francisco, Bayview Hunters Point is actually cut off. So even though it's actually, it's part of the city, obviously, but it's not shown on these maps. And it's a place where I think there's a lot of tensions. Like, it's one of the few places that are left in San Francisco where there's open land for development. So a lot of new development is actually going up in Bayview. But it's also a place of kind of historical inequities. So since about the 1950s, it's been primarily or historically African-American neighborhood that grew up around the shipbuilding era. And then when kind of the investment in the shipyards was pulled back, then that left a lot of folks out of work. And so it's a place where the child poverty rate, probably roughly like 25 or 30% of children in the Bayview live below the federal poverty line, which is ridiculous given the cost of living in San Francisco and the fact that the federal poverty line is just across the board. It's a national figure. It's also a place where probably 50% of folks have not had any college. And that's at a rate that's probably double the rest of the city. So it is a place where there's kind of on the one hand you can think of it as your typical under-resourced urban core neighborhood, but it's also a place where we've seen just we particularly experienced incredible welcome. And there's it's a place where we've seen God at work in a variety of different ways, including especially with church neighborhood partners.
There was this part of that story that we watched that there was an intentionality about place. And I love that you're talking about the background here, but how has that definition of place changed for you? Was it, you talk a little bit about, I think, walking around the city, but you obviously made a decision to be there. But when did it come from like, hey, we're here, to now let's embrace it and embrace the community around us?
Yeah, so probably to speak a little bit about that, it's related to the story of how Dayspring actually ended up in Bayview in the first place. So for the first 14 years of Dayspring's existence, we were located in the financial district. So we were right at the corner of Market Street and New Montgomery, in a skyscraper, and we had a great view of the 2012 World Series parade. When the Giants took the World Series. And so, but kind of at one point, the church that we're a part of, Redeemer Community Church, decided that for reasons of really the welcome that we had received from the Black church in Bayview, that Redeemer's location in Bayview was not just accidental, but was actually a matter of vocation. And it actually took us, I think, a while to get there. There were lots of kind of questions from folks in the congregation, being a congregation of primarily, Asian American led congregation, and frankly, the neighborhood for those that had grown up in San Francisco was a neighborhood that their parents would say, this is a neighborhood that you don't go to. This is a neighborhood that you avoid. But through the invitation that we received from the Black Church, through kind of our experience of listening to God corporately, we gradually kind of shifted from, we're not only accidentally here, we had spent several years in various locations within Bayview neighborhood, but that this was actually vocation. There's a sense that God was calling the congregation there. So together with that, like at one point at a church board meeting that I was participating in, I kind of threw out the idea, well, Dayspring's lease downtown is coming due, and Redeemer is also, having spent 5 years housing with Providence, not Providence, Cornerstone Missionary Baptist. That maybe we could, since we've decided that this is our place, maybe we might move in together, so that the business and the church can move in together. And I thought that it was a throwaway comment, and because we were talking about how the pastor of our congregation, Danny Fong, was a solo pastor, small congregation. It's very lonely, during the weekdays, and that company would be good. So that's kind of where I had thrown out this, and I thought, nobody's gonna, this is like a crazy idea, right? Move a technology consulting company from, middle financial district into Bayview. And Danny, to a person, every person in that room said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." And I thought, "Oh no, what have I done?"
Yeah, that doesn't even make sense, Chi-Ming. So I know how it would make sense for like the church to want that move to happen, but I can't for the life of me think why that would make sense for you as a technology company to make that move.
Yeah, probably to understand that, it's related to kind of the history and the calling and purpose of Dayspring. So we're a company that was started initially when Juliette and my co-founder Danny and his wife Cindy were all part of the youth ministry at a church called Grace Fellowship in San Francisco's Mission District. So at the time, their youth ministry was about 50% kids that had grown up in the congregation, so children of primarily Cal grads. At that point, there were lots of folks that were Cal grads in that congregation. So university educated, and then the surrounding community, a lot of it was Central American immigrant, and so the youth ministry was like half-half. And the original idea for Dayspring was actually Danny's idea that a holistic ministry to youth is going to require some kind of investment in job training and bridging kind of the digital divide, providing opportunity, like holistic opportunity for these youth. And so Dayspring was actually founded and funded by members of Grace Fellowship in order to be this business for the common good. And so in that sense, kind of the move to Bayview was consistent with the idea that the company was intended to be for the common good, at the outset.
So I love that perspective when you're talking about that this was set up from the very beginning. And yet, I imagine some people are listening to this and they're thinking, okay, that sounds good. I know that that's the missional intent. I know that that's when it started. But when you make a big move and a big change like that, there's probably some pain. There's probably some transition that you go through. Can you speak to the pain, but can you also speak to how did it galvanize the team maybe on the other side? Because I think some people are listening to it and saying, I can't do that. But I want you to speak to just kind of like some of the bumpiness of what you went through and what's it been on the other side of that journey.
Yeah, I think the story that comes to mind is that the first time that we had a client meet us at our new Bayview location, this was somebody that was from a nonprofit consulting group that, you probably understand it as like the McKinsey of nonprofit consulting, right? So the person I'm meeting with, Yale grad, comes and walks in the door. We're having this meeting about ways of assessing the performance of nonprofits. They're like a strategy consulting firm. We had built software for them to help them in their work. And so he walks in the door and he says, "Oh, funny thing, the taxi driver, this is pre-Uber, I think, taxi driver that dropped me off said, oh, definitely don't, definitely don't like take transit back. Like this is a really bad neighborhood." And that was kind of one of those things where I thought, I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach, we've tanked the company by making this move. That our clientele, folks are just not going to understand this move. I think to your question about, well, what is, how have I seen that develop over time? Thankfully, I think that that particular experience was actually more of an outlier. We've had other clients come through since then, that have seen like the business co-located with the church, co-located with the school, which comes in a few years later, and have actually more seen, oh, this is a really both compelling and challenging picture of how business, the possibilities for how business might function in a community, right? Where the business doesn't understand itself as parasitic off of the resources of a community, but actually sharing sharing commitment to the common good, sharing common grace with our neighbors.
One of the things that I've always been curious about, especially, when people talk about business for the common good, right? And so how do you guys, I guess, like make those decisions, calculate that algorithm with it's not just as simple as maximizing shareholder value, but you're saying, okay, there's all sorts of different things that are valuable to us and not just like maximum efficiency, maximum growth. So when you make a move like Bayview, it's going to cost you something, right? And so what are the other ways where, I guess, well, number one, how do you guys think through that? And then number two, what are the other ways that you feel like the company is shaped by, I guess, a gospel engine or a gospel ontology? And then unpack why.
Wow.
I know that's big, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions in there. I think maybe I'll maybe start with like the way that we've come to understand Dayspring's purpose. So, our telos, or what we're about, is to embody and bear witness to God's redeeming of the workplace, marketplace, and community. So there's more and more kind of come to appreciate that there's a lot in there. So the embodiment and bearing witness is both to say that there are particular practices that align with what it looks like to live under the reign of God, right? And so you need to be about that. And the bearing witness is that also then points towards the reign of God, right? So there's a sense in which what you're doing is always provisional, and what you're doing is always, it's always incomplete. So the embodiment's going to be incomplete, but hopefully what we're doing is pointing towards what life under the reign of God looks like. And then the God embodying bear witness to God's redeeming. So one of the this language of like redemption, I think maybe the emphasis that we put on it is that it is God's redeeming and not our redeeming, right? So like ultimately, kind of new creation comes as a disjunction. What we can do in this time between the times is to say, hey, faithfully and confidently and hopefully, this will happen, and so therefore we can live in these particular ways that exhibit the kind of freedom that we know is already on offer. And then finally, kind of the workplace, marketplace, community are the three arenas. It's just a helpful schema for us to think about like what, where our responsibilities, where we can enact, this embodiment. So workplace is kind of the arena of like relationships with coworkers. It touches on how we do salary structures, how we think about performance. Marketplace is the relationship between us and both customers as well as those that serve us, so vendors. And that raises questions of what do those relationships look like, and how do we treat them as neighbors, as opposed to somebody that we're primarily in a transactional relationship with. And then community is this kind of broader, like, again, back to that idea that a business should not be parasitic on the foundation of what's provided by neighborhood or city, but that has a common investment in that place. So that's kind of the schema in which I think about it. And under those are a variety of different practices where we're really thinking about how do you work out the ethic of Jesus in the life of a business.
More and more pastors are realizing the church can be a launching pad, equipping entrepreneurs to build redemptively and make a real difference. We've made it simple to serve the entrepreneurs in your church and your city. No cost, no catch. Get access to a ready-to-go video series, templates, and tools to host an 8-week foundation group right in your church. Just register with us, and we'll even direct local entrepreneurs to your community. We're building a network of 250 partnering churches across the country, each one featured as a go-to hub for faith-driven entrepreneurs in the area. Want to join the movement? All it takes is a 10-minute call with our team. Visit the link below to get started.
I remember when you were telling me about some of the ways that you were thinking about Dayspring as a business and how influenced and shaped that was by your faith. I mean, my mind was blown. Specifically, I remember 10 years ago, you were talking about like the concept of leverage and negotiation and how you're thinking about doing it differently. And there's like a number of things that you guys do so uniquely. Tell me about that. And then maybe tell me about the underlying philosophy or value that shaped that corporate decision.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the leverage idea was the idea that if the folks in the marketplace are our neighbors, and Jesus is saying that it's better that if somebody like takes your coat, then give them your tunic also, and if somebody asks you to walk 1 mile, then walk the second mile. That actually has implications for how we think about relating to our marketplace neighbors. So one of the commitments of Dayspring is that we don't want to use leverage. We refuse to use leverage in the marketplace. So we've never sent debts to collections. If somebody doesn't pay us, we won't. Our first move is not to withhold services, right? And we've had places where, and you kind of think about that. Well, you might get taken advantage of if you do that. And I think our response to that is, well, yes, Christians sometimes do get taken advantage of in that kind of way, and that our confidence is actually in the God who supplies our needs, and not in our ability to grasp or to hold on to something. So that's kind of one concrete example of how that's played out or worked out in the marketplace. One of the other practices that we have is that we target 3 months of cash reserves. So meaning that if our cash is more than 3 months look ahead, then we see that as kind of an invitation to ask, well, what might God be asking us to do with this excess cash? And the way that has kind of arisen out of reflections on Israel's kind of first lesson in the wilderness, what Ched Myers calls Israel's catechism, of basically saying that our provision isn't something that we store up, but that our provision actually comes from God. And for us as a business, we've kind of set a very concrete, 3 months. And it's one of those things that I think is just helpful to have something, whether it's 3 months or whether it's 6 months or something like that. It's actually just helpful to have something to say that there can be a limit to our accumulation, and that we can do that because God is trustworthy. And so, I think that kind of together with things like a commitment to have 5% of our time and 10% of our profit and 100% of our equity dedicated to the common good, having some of those concrete outworkings of particular commitments then leaves a lot of room for imagination, right? It allows us to ask, well, okay, so what might we do with this time or this profit? What might it mean for 100% of the company's equity to be dedicated to the common good? I think it gets us basically asking different questions.
Tell me about pay structures.
Yeah, pay structures. So the way that we do pay within the company is what we call a smooth curve. Other people, have kind of called it the Isaiah 40 curve, and the reason for that is because when in the Gospel according to Luke, when John the Baptist comes on the scene, announcing the kingdom of God, the way that that Luke talks about it is relating it to Isaiah 40, where preparing the way of the Lord means that every mountain and hill is brought low and every valley is lifted up. And the thing that we noticed in kind of following that call, that prepare the way of the Lord, is that the specific practices that John the Baptist invited his followers to were all economic, right? So he basically said, if you've got, the person that has extra food, share it with the person who doesn't have any. Actually, I think it's cloak, like 2 cloaks, share it with the person that doesn't have any. Soldiers, be content with your wages. And tax collectors collect only what is allocated to you, right? And don't extort folks. And so these are all very concrete kind of economic practices that exhibit the justice of God, exhibit the kind of communion that God intends for us. And so in Dayspring's practice, what that's looked like is that when we benchmark salaries, we benchmark them against market, but we discount the salaries at the top, and we boost the salaries at the bottom, so that there could be, there could be a more just sharing, because we think that just kind of left to the operations of the market, pay can go, can go out of whack. And what we want to reflect in our internal economy is something that is closer to the divine economy.
Yeah. What's like the average difference between CEO pay, highest pay and lowest pay?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in kind of the larger marketplace, I think there have been studies that, most recently, like CEOs of large corporations are paid 350 times the average worker in a corporation. And that number has kind of varied. It's grown tremendously in the age of, as Thomas Piketty talks about, the super manager. But 350 to 1 in terms of the highest CEO to the average worker. And on some level, it feels like, well, that's the operation of the market. But we think that the operation of the market is not a given, and that's not actually what what God's redeemed world looks like. So for Dayspring, we've set that set kind of the limit, and obviously we're a small company, so there's lots of things that aren't completely translatable. But we set the limit to be 3 to 1. Currently, it's about 2.2 to 1, and that limit of 3 to 1, when we were actually employing janitorial staff on our staff, it was all that was true at that time as well. So it's again kind of one of those, if you think about it as working out particular practices in a particular context that are based on or coming out of how do we interpret scripture, how do we look at how ethics ought to work itself out, play itself out in very concrete ways.
What would you say to someone that would say all the stuff that you're talking about? I mean, it's romantic, idealistic, it's not realistic. And they say the better mechanism is to not like try to do everything in this kind of like one entity, but have a company and be like this exceptional, like follow the market rules, you know, maximize value, and then make a ton of money and then give it to the church so that they can do like the churchy stuff. What would you, how would you respond to that?
I guess the first thing I would say is that I don't in any way think of Dayspring as prescriptive. Like, I don't think of Dayspring as kind of the only way to live out what faithfulness looks like, right? Whenever we kind of talk about, whenever I've had the chance to talk about Dayspring, I always say, well, hopefully this particular picture is, you know, kind of stirs a little imagination, but folks are going to need to work out things in their particular context, and you know, in the arenas where they have more insights and all of that. The second thing I would say to kind of go along with that is that I am not sure that God's math is our math. So in your you know, in your kind of description, I think there are, you know, some underlying assumptions, right? Like to make a lot of money is better than to make a little bit of money, or you know, like that kind of thing, right? And if I take a look at like the, you know, story of the widow and her 2 copper coins, right, or of the laborers in the vineyard, or of the woman with the alabaster jar, I just think that the logics that we operate under come to, you know, some kind of limitation, come to an end at some point, and that the way that, you know, I remember, you know, Justin was actually talking about this with Dave Blanchard from Praxis the other day, that, you know, our that God's foolishness is wiser than our wisdom, right? So yeah, that those may my 2 answers to that. It's contextual, and that I think there's healthy room for maybe better imaginations than potentially we've been practiced in doing.
And can I add that I think a lot of times we call something impractical when it's largely left untried. And I think really a lot of the practices and theology behind Daysprings is really fueled and fed by our local church.
That's so you guys have both mentioned this concept, and I would love for you to unpack it more. And that's the concept of prophetic imagination or gospel imagination. One of the things I love about what you're describing is that, you know, you have this reserve, and then anytime there's more cash than the 3-month reserve, it's an opportunity to go to the Holy Spirit and ask, what do you want to do with this, and create very imaginative space for, you know, redemptive kingdom work to take place. And so tell me about gospel space, gospel imagination. And then I do think that like that kind of weaves very nicely into maybe the story of the birth of Rise.
Do you want to take this?
You go it.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that I do think that the way that I understand like Dayspring's relationship with Redeemer, the local congregation that we're part of, is that Redeemer resources Dayspring with theological imagination or prophetic imagination, you know, however you might speak of it. So I think that it's actually important that the story of the church, the story of God's superabundance, the story of communion, is something that is it is non-native to like a market way of thinking, right? And that kind of story helps us to imagine our lives in the market or as a business differently, right? So from scarcity to superabundance, from commodity to gift, from competition to communion, right? And that is kind of what the church does in its preaching. The church does in its its practices of sharing. So I think that's largely kind of how I understand both where the thought comes from and where, as Juliette was saying, the practice comes out of seeing that it is actually possible in like the space of kind of church proper to experience life as a gift, to experience life as communion, and then that becomes helpfully imported into the world of business. And maybe to kind of get to so one of the concrete things that happened as Dayspring and Redeemer were moving in together is that we said, well, let's not take up all of the space in this semi-industrial building, but let's set aside some space as what we call third space, or what we kind of took to referring to as like a prophetic emptiness. We're going to see what God might fill this with. And over time, as we listen to neighbors, that became, as we listen to neighbors, as we listen to like teachers within the congregation, like that became Rise. So,
What's Rise?
Well, Rise is rooted in the Bayview, and as Chi-Ming said, kind of born out of the partnership between Redeemer and Dayspring, and it is a Christian high school right now that really embraces its diverse student body and gives them an exceptional, top-notch college prep education that hopefully gives them the love of God such that the students can reason, create, serve, and lead. 80% of our seats are reserved for first generation of college, low income, and the Bayview scholars. And then 20% of our seats are at large. And then our mission is that 100% of our students gain admission into a 4-year university. So that's kind of Rise.
Tell me because when I met you, Juliette, you had, I would describe our first meeting is you were a woman on a mission, fierce and unrelenting. And so tell me unpack that vision that you have for Rise, and particularly the educational disparity that you were trying to address.
Yeah. Like Chi-Ming said, a lot of it was driven by just being in the neighborhood and getting to know the neighborhood. There's no, at that time, there was no, the local middle school had shut down. There was no high school in the Bayview. So all the students from the neighborhood, which actually has a larger percentage of school-age children in the city, they're all being bused out. And when we're talking to our neighbors and things like that, a large part of their heart and their lament is the education for their children. And even in our experience, we had our neighbor, this young girl who would come over, her and her brother would come over and do their homework with our kids and our housemates' kids. And this idea that's beautiful, like for our kids to learn alongside what we want for our kids. Can that be extended towards the neighborhood? And so that really is kind of the heart of it, is just kind of sharing the particular gifts that we've been given in terms of knowing the educational system, knowing how to navigate all of that, and combine it with our place and our neighbors. And there's more on our website, riseprep.org. And I would say that our educational model it's not that it's so innovative so much as it is just really rooted in understanding that good education is relational and not transactional. It's not rote, it's not mechanical. And so we combined these amazing teachers Most of our teaching faculty have master's degrees. They have degrees from Stanford and Harvard, and they know how to teach the students, and they just love on them. And so they're able to keep these super high academic standards, combine it with a lot of support. And then I would say the fact that we're just surrounded, in this web of relationships with community organizations, a lot of churches and partners. We match our students with advocates that kind of champion them for their journey in high school. And part of that ecosystem is Dayspring too. So they not only do they support RISE financially, but they do things like host a STEM club. They're making gliders right now for a glider competition. And they've done entrepreneurship workshops for our students, and they've done summer internships for our students. And that definitely benefits our students in giving them access to professionals on a regular cadence. And then also, I think the other way around too, that the professionals at Dayspring get to meet and know these students, the next generation that they are inspiring.
With every good movie, there's always a director's cut or behind the scenes where you look behind the scenes and you don't realize kind of how things are made. And while we might not have pyrotechnics or car crashes or anything of a Hollywood blockbuster, we have fought through some technical stuff here. I think I'm on my third pair of headphones here for today's episode as we're processing through this. But it's a fun conversation as we are wrestling with this. And if I were to recap some of the things of what I've seen in today's episode, is like there's this wonderful passion that started with this, idea of what you guys said of, hey, should we do this? And I love how God works, where it's kind of like you throw a conversation up just kind of in a board meeting, in a conversation, you're thinking, man, that's crazy. Nobody's going to go for it. And everybody says, hey, that's great. Let's do it. And just to see how God speaks in whispers like that then get louder. But then the faithfulness of like what you guys have continued to do, whether it's making that actual decision to move. And we saw so much of that in the video story that we saw. But then as you start to unpack it, I'm reminded of some other things, like a story with Don Flo, where he just talks about leverage, and you talked about it there, is whether in their business selling a car, and in your business, like, we're not going to use this to an advantage. We're going to really kind of like say, hey, is this really God's scoreboard? Is this how things are supposed to be done? And I love that. And then I love this idea of like the church, and you're saying like, hey, place matters, church matters. And that was something new. And then what's so beautiful as you're finishing there, Juliette, just to talk about this idea of what does it look like to then build on that and to go deeper. And when you think about the education models, but then being integrated with mentors and people in the community, business leaders, it's just a fun thing to see kind of this messy, beautiful, wonderful, virtuous circle of this all coming together. I guess as we come to a close, I'd love to have just kind of this last word to frame up for you guys to frame up for us is, what is something unexpected that you've learned through this process? What is something maybe about just the partnership with the church, the journey of this, and maybe if I could lead it, maybe something about partnering with the church. What's something unexpected, something that you've learned? Because I think this is a conversation that a lot of business owners are wrapping their mind with. And I think Kevin said it so beautifully. It's fun to think of the hypothetical, but when it gets real, what does this look like? So, closing word from you guys, what's something that you take away from this journey that you guys have been on in partnering with churches?
I can give you an education-specific surprise. I think that I never cease to be amazed at how true God's word and how true His promises are. So I am always amazed to discover friends that I didn't know I had. And in all the different partnership conversations and talking to the various supporters who are so passionate about investing in the lives of these young students. And then when I say I'm like God's word is really true, it's words like when God says that His love covers a multitude of sin, that actually plays out in the educational results of our students. So the fact that despite the setbacks that our students have had, despite the disadvantages or whatnot, that love can actually overcome those things. Educational disparity, you might not think that's something that the church could do anything about. It's an intractable problem. And yet, no, it's like lifting a family out of generational poverty is a very solvable thing by the love of God and His people.
I think maybe the thing that I think about with respect to the relationship with the church, and even maybe kind of the question of what does it look like for entrepreneurs to continue in perseverance, is that there's a lot of joy in doing things in community, right? So I would say one of the part of the story of Dayspring is that elder who, when they were initially kind of funding Dayspring, lending us money to get started 27 years ago, said, if this works out, we're all going to rejoice, and if it goes under, then we're going to learn how to be family, right? And it's also the elder who, at our 25th anniversary, said, okay, what I see in what has become of Dayspring is the Hebrew word tzedakah, the righteousness and justice, and giving me kind of a Hebrew lesson of, this is the picture that I see. So it's that kind of encouragement that then kind of keeps us going on. And I think, one beautiful picture that from the school side is that every Sunday after church, we convert the sanctuary into 2 classrooms because Redeemer and Rise share space, right? And there's this divider that divides the sanctuary. It's that slides, kind of these panels that slide into place. And there's this 3-year-old, Jeremy, who happens to be the son of one of Dayspring's board members, but who sees it as his job to push those dividers to divide the sanctuary space into 2 classrooms. And so every Sunday you have this little 3-year-old that's kind of helping to set the classrooms up. And I imagine it's that kind of partnership, the partnership of retired people that give of their gifts to be the business manager, the partnership of the folks that bring snacks, the partnership of the folks that are sponsors for the kids at Rise. It's that kind of communal encouragement that really fires us and keeps us going.
That's so beautiful. I mean, I just love the vivid nature of that picture of just thinking of our little kiddos starting to sense that they're a part of the team. And I think that's just so much like what you're talking about. It feels like in sports and youth, we love being a part of a team. We love competing together, winning together. And yet somewhere that's lost. Yeah. And when we come back to just what you were talking about, Juliette, is just this idea we're surprised to find these teammates that just step out in that right moment when you need it. And just what a beautiful picture it is. One of the things I'm struck by this, friends, is you're listening to this and saying, okay, what does this look like? It's a conversation that we've been having a lot here as a team. And so as we come to a close, I want you to really wrestle with this in twofold. You might be asking the question, how does this change where I am right now? And that might change how you operate as a business, how you think about, how you approach pay structure, how you just everything about your operations. But then there's this other piece of this conversation, and it's something we've been talking about here recently, is how do we recognize as entrepreneurs and investors, there is this moment in history right now where they're being looked to solve some of the great problems of the world, or solve it in a local level in your backyard. And I think oftentimes we think that that's out of reach and that's for somebody else, but surely that can't be me. And what you're seeing a story of here is saying, yes, we're seeing something. We're seeing something that's that's broken and in need of redemption. and we're going to step into it. And so if you haven't checked it out already, there's this website called solvingtheworldsgreatestproblems.org. And I would just encourage you, take a look at it from a place of inspiration. You're going to see stories like Dayspring and others that hopefully just inspire you as an entrepreneur to dream, to think differently, to think with this fun, beautiful, redemptive imagination about what God might do. And then lastly, as you hear from us often, don't do it alone. Do it in the community of other friends. Do it with other faith-driven entrepreneurs that you can celebrate, that you can laugh with, that you can journey with, that you can share in the tough times and the good times with. So check those things out on the website. Those are some great resources to you. This has just been a gift of a conversation. So grateful to have this here and for Kevin to join us. But check this out. Check out that website, and we will see you next week on the podcast.
Come for content, stay for community. Join a faith-driven entrepreneur group online or in person. No cost, no catch. Visit faithdrivenentrepreneur.org. That's faithdrivenentrepreneur.org.